Once there was a businessman who kept everything in his head. At the time, it wasn't too difficult. He could count his employees on his fingers. And he only made 1 or 2 products. Of course, he left himself a few reminders, some knots in his handkerchief, a few calculations on odd pieces of paper. He even had an order book. But all his basic information was in his head. And then his business grew. And soon he hadn't enough fingers to count his employees, or enough handkerchiefs for all the knots he needed to make. He could no longer keep everything in his head. He had to add people and buy calculating machines and the latest type of abacus. Numbers became all important. Huge jobs appeared and threatened to take over. Invoicing, accounts receivable, inventory control, payroll. Even with their latest machines, the accountants were overburdened. Then along came a new machine called a computer. Enormous, repetitive jobs could be dealt with very quickly. The computer saved time, it saved money, and it was more efficient. Obviously, all the different departments wanted to make life easier by using the computer. Applications for the computer system multiplied, and it began to be known as data processing. For each department's work, they created files of data and wrote the programs for them. And it was each department's responsibility to supply its own data. All of this produced remarkable results. But management began to feel a little uneasy. All the departments competed for the data processing machine. Soon the company's information was spread all over the place, frequently duplicated. A Mr. Roberts, for example, was ROB007 in one file and ROB88 in another. There were many similar discrepancies, so that the files became very confusing. And it got more and more difficult to relate to one another. Very often, in fact, people would put in file number 1 information that another department had already put in file number 2 in a different format. Working like that, they were soon spending all their time updating. This increased the risk of errors and omissions. They all talked about data processing, but because of the demands on the system, the clear, accurate information that our businessman had at the start was becoming difficult to obtain. Of course, each department's work was running better and better, but relationships between departments got worse and worse. Then, management started to remember the good old days, when everything was kept in their head. They began to dream about the ideal information system, where you only had to ask the machine an ordinary question without an interpreter to get an almost immediate answer, and where each person in the company could do the same and get the information necessary for his job. What would you need for such a system? Well, first of all, the files would have to be compatible with each other. And you'd have to avoid repeating data, and so cut down the errors and the multiple updates. You'd also need to look at the data in many sequences to make it usable by everyone. Well, actually, not quite everyone. You'd also have to have data files independent of programs, so a change to one wouldn't require a change to the other. In addition, you'd want to be able to expand any application running on the system without disrupting the others. Until now, you could only do this by having a traditional database. But the cost was high because you had to sort all of it out at once after you knocked down your whole structure. It took a lot of work, time, and money. So it was only possible for the big companies. But what about everyone else? How can they solve their problems? For everyone else, and the big companies too, we have a system to help you make a new start in seeing things clearly. A system that allows you to build, little by little, a new structure from what you already have. But how does this work? Well, so that one file can relate to another, they each have to have something in common. In each of them, for example, the same part should carry the same part number. That way you can establish links from file to file. Of course, you'll have to do a certain amount of tidying up and polishing in your existing files. But you don't have to do a huge cleaning job all at once. If you did, you'd be adopting the solution of the big companies. And we wouldn't be talking about a new idea at all. You could keep existing files of data, but that would mean you'd also be keeping duplicate and triplicate information, which would take space and add to your work. Certainly the machine can handle that approach. But look at our way. You build new files using only the useful information from the old ones. And what you haven't got time to clean, you can still keep because it can still be used. But to avoid rebuilding the Tower of Babel, where each little file had its own little name, we can now have a single definition of data so everyone can gradually use the same language. From the newly organized files, a user can select just the data he needs for the problem he is working on. And that's what we call taking the logical view. And that's how we created the files called logical files. Because a computer works logically and uses logic to give you the information you need. It's because of these logical files that, without upsetting the work already in the system, you can branch out into new applications. Finally, little by little, you will have built yourself a database. And because it's a simple idea, it's simple to put into place and add to. With everyone speaking the same language and using the same data, the system can help improve everyone's productivity, since they can communicate with it easily. Relationships between your different departments can be greatly improved. What's even better is that the computer can hold everything in its storage so that management can take out at any time exactly what they need. And that's what our computer is all about.